Good morning. I'm on the road a lot, and I have a good time most of the places I go. But this has been really fun this week. I've enjoyed so many different conversations. I really have been blessed by my connections with you. I have been blessed by the times of worship that we've shared together and by quiet conversation. It's been a really, really special time. I want to say a few things. The bookstore is going to close middle of the morning. So I've got a few books back there, and I just wanted to let you know what they are. This book is called The Surprise Factor. It was written in 2013, I believe. Co-author Kim Shockley. She and I have done a lot of coaching together. This book is about finding leverage to change a church where change is needed, okay? And so it's especially good reading if you're at the beginning of a new appointment, especially good for that. But any time that you're just trying to get handles on change in a congregation, this is about some strategies for that. This is my second book that I wrote. It is the least known book, and they found some back there. It's called Healing Spiritual Amnesia. It's about remembering who we are as people of God. And we have a little amnesia every now and then, you think? This is Weird Church. This is what I'm going to be talking about this morning. It is the last book that I published with Beth Estock. The book that I talked about the other day, Multi, comes out at the end of the summer. Weird Church is, the title is maybe off-putting to you. I mean, the book of Acts is weird. Agreed? Okay, all right. So whenever the Holy Spirit begins to move and fresh things begin to happen, things happen that go against the way we've always done it, and sometimes what some of our first instincts are. And often we discover that the churches that are thriving and flourishing in our time, they seem weird to us because things are done in ways maybe that we're not used to. This book looks at some of the changes that are needed, and at the very back part of the book, I'm not nearly getting into that today. Well, I said the last half of the book, we have 19 different sort of models of church that we see thriving and really doing well in the United States. The one kind that's not doing very well is the denominationally based franchise. Okay? And what I mean is the McDonald's church, the church that gets the box of stuff from McDonald's so they can serve McDonald's in a standard uniform sort of way. And that church is in cardiac arrest right now. We talk about that in this book. Okay, the topic of our next 40 minutes is called Preaching Across Competing Worldviews. We have a lot of different people living in a lot of different places. Sometimes they converge. And if you're dealing with a church that has any of those multis going on, you may have some different worldview in the church. There was a period of time when we never had to worry about any of this, except for two different worldviews that have sort of made peace with each other over the years within the world of Methodism. But there's some others out there, and you get on an elevator in Macy's today, and there's likely to be every one of those worldviews on the elevator with you. Okay, so if you'll turn to page 6 in the handouts, if you don't have, who needs handouts? There are some in the back. If maybe a friend can help us pass some of those around. There is an assessment. I would like for you to read page 6 and better part of 7. And you're thinking about your church and your neighborhood context, the town in which you're located, whatever. The church, the world around the church. You're going to read the paragraph, and on a scale 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, 0 means that does not describe at all my church. 5 is you nailed it, okay? You're going to say, to what degree does that describe the world of my church? Then you're going to say the same thing about the neighborhood, and you're going to go all the way down. The reason that you're doing this is going to help you understand what I'm about to talk about. This exercise really is important, and I would like everybody to do it. It will really tune you in to what we're about to do, because I'm going to move pretty fast here, starting in about 3 minutes. Okay, in these descriptions, we've color-coded these descriptions, and I didn't make all this stuff up. I did write these descriptions, but they are coming out of a way of sort of dissecting culture that's called spiral dynamics. It's just kind of a way to kind of sort people according to experiences. And basically, spiral dynamics works like this. It says that at any given point in time, we develop a worldview that of habits and stories and key practices that make sense in light of the challenges that we face at that particular place. Okay, and so people are in a very complex world in which we live. People live with a lot of different present experiences at the same time. Now, as you look at this thing, on the first page where we talked about blue, that's going to be a dominant cultural experience in a lot of small town life. But we were talking about in the back, we said once you cross that beltway that goes around Atlanta, interstate whatever it is, yeah, it gets orange real fast inside that beltway. Okay, you move from the blue to the orange. Methodism has been a dance between blue and orange since the earliest days. We have one foot in a very solid evangelical experience and one foot in with a comfort with higher learning, and we have balanced that and also struggled with that, but that's been a part of who we are for a long, long time. And our churches are designed for the world of blue and orange. Okay, that's what we do. Okay, now if you go back up to see that red, and we're going to talk about these in a little more in a moment. That red is a danger zone. It's a gangland. It's people that are in survival mode, and we want to invite them into that blue space. But there's a lot of people that have sort of moved into this red space right now. It's really common right now in our society, and it's an angry space. Okay. Then if you come across over, there's another angry space. It's the green space, and it's kind of the two extremes. We have people gravitating into both of those spaces. The green space you're going to find where you have a lot of young adults. You're going to find it around universities to some degree, and you will find it around in places where people are a little bit distant from church life. But it's estimated right now that maybe 60% of millennials, young adults, are living in this space. Our churches were not designed for this space. Only 5% of people that live in this space identify on a regular basis. They may be members somewhere, but they're not really identifying with a local church. Okay, so anyway, every community has its personality, and as you did that survey, you were able to see that your church and your neighbors are not always in the same place. In fact, more and more, they are rarely in the same place. Churches, when they are planted, often mirror their community in terms of cultural orientation, and then over time, we can become very, very different than those communities, especially if the church has been around a while and a bunch of new neighbors move in. So this is if up on the screen, this is another way of looking at all of those colors. It's sort of an accumulative thing. It's sort of like your brain. You just keep adding to it. And all the way through, as you move through that spiral, you never lose any of that stuff. So you could be all the way out there in the green, like a pastor that came to an event that we led, or that my group led in Estes Park. And they were hippies in a lot of way and read very much like this green paragraph here in terms of their orientation to life and the things that were important to them. But one night, a drunken man somehow got the room key to their room and was lost and was trying to stumble in to his room, and he came into their room, and it was this couple and their two toddlers. And the man, pastor, said, I heard this voice growling and saying, who the blankety blank are you, and you better get out of here. And he realized it was him. And he had just that quickly moved from the green space back to the red space, which was appropriate at that moment. Okay? So we move back and forth, on this stuff, depending. Now, let's see here. I'm going backwards. Here are the people that helped develop this. Don Beck was the person that really popularized spiral dynamics. He was looking for a way to prevent a civil war in South Africa. He worked with Nelson Mandela, United Methodist, in South Africa to try to help to understand how can people be living in the same space and see the world so differently. And this theory was a part of how they managed it was out of this sort of way of dissecting that culture that they managed to better understand one another and to make decisions together and to find strategies neighborhood by neighborhood that people could come together and avoid a civil war. So that was 50 trips he made to South Africa during that season. In each of these spaces, in each of these worldviews, there is a whole set of stuff. Biological, psychological, social, spiritual, and it's kind of a script. And part of the reason that we feel like sometimes we're on Mars and that person is on Venus is because we're living really with separate worldview. Now, one of the good pieces of good news I have for you is this, that the Holy Spirit, the God of Pentecost, is able to integrate people of different worldview into one family and one faith. There is a way to speak gospel that is relevant to each of these places. Furthermore, a person is not a good person or a bad person depending on where they live. That's just where they happen to live. That's their zip code, culturally speaking. And we can minister effectively. We can design ministry. We can help to articulate gospel in ways that make sense in each of these cultural spaces. The point is that we are most accustomed to working in that blue space. That's where we work. That's where most of us work most of the time. And that orange space, occasionally we go there when we think about helping to develop gospel, develop church program in a way that is therapeutic and helps to build stronger families, that's very practical to life. That is but other than that, we are not practiced in really thinking about the fact that some of the folks, some of our grandkids, some of the neighbors moving in are not going to respond to the way that we are doing things until we step back and begin to get in relationship with them and to articulate gospel in ways that make sense for them. That yellow space, I will say, probably 1% of the population lives in that space, maybe 2%. But in that space, you're kind of moving beyond a judgmental way of looking at the other, okay? So in each of these, you get kind of locked into your point of view, and the other person is that crazy person on Facebook, okay? So, I mean, you're in your view. But from the yellow space, first of all, you've been in all those spaces yourself, and you kind of understand and that it's a part of that person's context. For that reason, a lot of the work we do in seminaries today, whether we don't name it in this way, but a lot of the work is really helping pastors to function out of that yellow space because they got everybody in their congregation and they have to love them all. I mean, it really is your job, you know. So a pastor, and you may, in your heart of hearts, you may just be true blue, you know, in terms of your own cultural outlook and experience on things, but you've still got to get in that yellow space in order to pastor all your people. And that's just a part of, that just kind of goes with our territory. In the book, Weird Church, we talk about 7 meta shifts that we think churches could make that would really be helpful as we seek to reach people outside these traditional, the blue and orange space. I'm going to talk about 2 of them in the time that we have. First of all, we need to move from fear to freedom. We are in a fearful mode. The whole country is in a fearful mode. The whole world is in a fearful mode. We have to get out of that fearful space. Because when we are in a fearful space, we are not at our best as God's ministers. This is a hymn right out of the United Methodist hymnal. God of change and glory, God of time and space, when we fear the future, give to us your grace. As old ways disappear, let your love cast out all fear. Part of the reason that we're afraid, and there's a lot of reasons, but a part of it is we've got a rise of a new generation of young adults, they're now not so young anymore, that do not behave like their grandparents. They do not relate to institutional anything like their grandparents. and we have designed church for their grandparents. Now, granted, we may have updated this and that. We may have guitars and drums and such, but still, basically, the structure, the paradigm of how we do church, it was designed for their grandparents, and they're not behaving like their grandparents. And we are frustrated, and we're wringing our hands, and that's not helping to reach any more of them. So they're disappearing from many of the churches that were designed for a certain worldview and experience. Then the other tower, part of this, the other twin tower, is the fact that the folks that have hung around with us are now beginning to leave this earth. The term death tsunami, I believe, was coined by Lovett Weems. We talked about it as a future event for about 20 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, it came right across the Atlantic Ocean and it hit. And now we are in a moment where the younger people still are not behaving like their grandparents, and the older people are leaving, and the money's plummeting, and people are in a sour mood. Okay? And it's a very different season of ministry than when we started out. If you've been at this for a couple of decades, this is a different kind of space. And in the book on leverage, surprise factor, we talk about the fact that when you walk into a church and they say, and you ask, what's the church you dream of? And people talk about the fact that we don't have enough young people. We wish we had some more children and all. Don't brush it over. Hold on to that dissatisfaction, because you're going to need some dissatisfaction for them to be able to tolerate the change that's going to be needed in order to reach those folk, okay? So don't just paper it over and say, no, it'll be fine. Don't do that, okay? But at the same time, we have to get out of a fearful space and move into a joyful space and a trusting space and a believing space that God has a future for our church, okay? And too many churches are just in a fearful thing, and then they get into a survival mode where it's really all about, every decision is about the money and about the building and about how long can we string this out. And we've just got to let go of that. And the only way we're going to let go of that is through a spiritual journey, okay? By the year 2050, 2/3 of the congregations in the United States currently established will be gone, okay? Now, I say that just to kind of that's, no matter how good you are at what you do, that's what's going to happen, okay? Because they're at the end of their life cycle. I told this to the group of young people at the 2019 National Youth Event in Kansas City last week, and they go like, well, yeah, of course, I said, but the good news is that in that same amount of time, a lot of new churches are going to be planted, and probably more than half of the churches that will exist in the year 2050 don't even exist yet. And I said to those young people, you're going to plant them. You're going to create church for your generation in languages and categories and structures that make sense for your people and for your kids. So, God is in charge. The world is in trouble, but God is in charge, and there will be new churches. At the same time, there is possibility for many of our existing churches, we do not have to end it by 2050. The church growth movement hasn't done too well, folks. Ever since it started, we've been shrinking. Just saying, okay? It is the experience of Pentecost that we need today. Pentecost, if you're going to go back to that story, they were scared, they were under siege, they were huddled without a sense of either what was going on and fearful that they could all be carried away before the day is out, if someone found them huddled there, okay? And in the midst of that fear, the Spirit came, and not only did the fear let up in that room, but they got out in the middle of the street and they went public with it. The fear was gone. And now, part of that was just they still had that resurrection wow thing going on in their lives, but even with that, there was a terrible fear. And what we often forget about the earliest believers is they had no New Testament and they had no precedents like we have They were really living in the moment with God, living by faith, and there was not a script, okay? And yet, in that crazy and wild space, God was faithful, and the church thrived and exploded. And it will again. I was in my computer got stolen at a book signing party. I was in Portland, Oregon, and a guy walked into the room who was wearing pajama pants, which was kind of odd. But Portland's kind of weird, and I just thought it was a weird preacher, And when we weren't looking, when we were signing books, he took the computer, he went running out. He got nervous and he dropped it in the bushes, and it was in the bushes for about 6 weeks in the rain, intermittent rain in Portland, Oregon. A person found it, turned it in to the police, it came back to me. It still works. The replacement has been replaced, but that old computer that was in the still works. During the time that I was in disorientation and trying to rebuild my life on the new computer, I went out into the woods, into the rainforest for a couple of days and just got a room and just started. I had to redo my income tax. I mean, it was crazy. And so in that space, I went walking in the woods, and I came into an old cypress forest, and I discovered a forest that was 400 years old. And just down from that, I came to a big cypress tree, and I looked up, and there was no leaves at all. And there was a sign the National Park Service had put there to say, "This tree is dead." But it is still teeming with life. The tree is not growing. The structure is here. There was an eagle's nest on top, and all kinds of critters that lived in the tree but the life that had grown that tree was gone. Okay? It reminded me of the church. You got the DS on top, looking around. You got little squirrels peeking out, that's us. We're still living off of that thing, but the tree is not growing right now, okay? So I said, well, that's kind of sad. And then we came to the next one, and it was the tree falling over. That's what happens next, is the trees fall down. But anyway, what I learned about this did I say cypress? It was a spruce grove. But what I learned about the spruce is they do about 400 years, and then they die, and they all fall down together. And there's an interim period of about 75 where little scraggly things grow up. I call them fresh expressions. You have these little scraggly things grow up for about 75 years. And then what happens? The spruce start coming up again. And they do another 400-year run. If you want to do it, we could get Diana Butler Bass in here and do some church history. You'll see these patterns over time. We are moving into a scraggly tree period. But friends, those spruce have been coming up a long time. The forest is just fine. It's in good shape. And the church of God is probably in better shape than we realize. But we're going through one of those moments, okay? And in that moment, we just need to let go of the fear and just to have fun and just to say, well, Lord, you got a sense of humor or something, but you put me here at this time and place to be faithful to you, and I'm gonna go with that, okay? And don't compare yourself to what Dr. So-and-so was doing in your county 50 years ago. That was another world 50 years ago. Don't compare yourself. Dr. So-and-so would be struggling if he saw what was going on right now in your county. Okay, so anyway, so we got to get out of this fear thing. But in terms of preaching, we are moving culturally from a broadcast mode, and broadcast worked real well with people in that orange and blue zone, where basically we're doing that right now. I'm broadcasting and you're taking notes and trying to laugh at my jokes. That's broadcast, okay? We're moving from broadcast to a more collaborative mode. This is going to be a major impact on the nature of preaching in our century, okay? We're moving from broadcast into an interactive mode. Call it conversation, okay? And the newspaper was a revolution. A guy named Gutenberg invented this machine so that I didn't have to depend upon the official people in order to tell me what is and what is not. With that machine, I and you, we can print our own version of what is and what is not. And we can also print Bibles. Well, that revolution is now on steroids. And we're moving beyond simply newspapers. In fact, newspapers are struggling in the United States. We moved from newspapers. A lot of people never really got into newspapers because they grew up in the TV age. And they got their broadcast through television. And once upon a time, we had like 3 or 4 channels, and everybody was watching them not that long ago. Well, look here, there's Walter Cronkite, and there we've got Reverend Cronkite, okay? And back in those days, he had a 30% share of the national population, okay? Now, he has a 3% share of the national population. Actually, there's good news here, is that our churches are doing better than CBS and NBC and Fox News. All of them put together. The churches are doing better than those folk. We're dying slower than them. Yeah, that's right. So just realize times have shifted, and we are in an interactive age. And when I look at that picture, I had the young people look at that picture. I said, what does that conjure up in you? And you know what they basically said was, it's not a real exciting place. There was one young person that said peace. There was one, because we're all different. There was one young person that said that was a positive picture, but for the most part, it did not inspire positive energy. The newspaper is breaking up. The culture of broadcast is coming to an end, and we're moving into a different space. This is a platform. And so when we talk about a platform, we're talking about more of an infrastructure, a context, a space that we bring together in which good things happen. Okay? Now, if you want to just think about this event, the Georgia Pastor School, it is both broadcast, but the best part of this event is not the broadcast part. It's the interactive part. It's the unscripted and unmonitored conversations around the table at breakfast. A great church in this era has to build a platform. And if you have a strong platform, you can do some broadcasting within it. There can be some words from management every now and then, and people will pay attention. But the thing that holds us together is no longer the broadcast. It is the platform. And so in a world like that, you think small groups are important? Oh, yeah. Now, they've always been important, but in this era, you just simply cannot do what we have tried to do in many cases, which is to hold a church together with a worship service and kind of slack on Sunday school and small groups. You cannot do that anymore. Because without the platform, most persons under the age of 50 simply will not stay connected to what you're doing. Okay? There has to be interactivity. Now, sometimes we even see this in worship, where churches create situations where people can comfortably interact with one another. That is an artful thing, and be careful with it, because I've walked into situations where it was done poorly, and I wanted to run out the back door as fast as I could possibly get. So if you're going to have any kind of conversation, and you're going to invite strangers into that conversation, make sure that it is set up in a way that they don't feel like they didn't know the right Bible answer. But that you ask questions in a way, or that they're asked to reveal something that's far too personal to be revealed to a stranger. Use common sense with this. If you're going to do any kind of interactive work with strangers, keep it light, keep it fun, and easy, and draw them, start with comfortable, common life experience. Often you can deal with that. When we talked the other day about that existential crisis, people will talk about their existential crisis. You can start there. We're all experts on that. So we have all these different kinds of ways that the New York Times or what's the Atlanta paper? Okay. This is how they stay alive. People are interacting in a variety of ways. It's not just, the town crier standing up in a little room behind a wooden box. We got a lot of different ways that churches are doing gospel. But without that platform, we're simply not going to reach beyond the dwindling number of folks we've been reaching in the past. What could this look like? I would like for you to turn over in let's see here, where it says putting spiral theory to work. It's on page 9. I have 3 different topics here that the way we might talk about those things could be different depending on what space we're in. Now, I grew up in that blue cultural space. I've gone to school, and I've lived in that orange space, and I've bounced around and differentiated from family and changed denominations and kind of became my own guy. I've done all of that. So the blue and the orange is comfortable space for me. And so I get it. When we sing that Andre Crouch song last night or the night before, the blood never loses its power, I get it. I'm on it. It makes sense. But if you're in the green space, it may not. So how do we talk about salvation and talk about the atonement of Christ in ways that make sense for people that are living in this new space that do not necessarily understand old images, okay? And may be scared of them. Or the very idea of God sending a son to die becomes very troubling. The thing about atonement is that all we're trying to do with an atonement theory is to say Jesus died, Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, Jesus is going to come again. What does that have to do with me? That's what atonement is. How does that have to do with my relationship with God? And so sometimes we need to create new metaphors that make sense of that for new generations. And we're not going to let go of the key fact that Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, Jesus is coming again for us. That's still the stuff that's the charisma, But the metaphors we use to talk about it may be different. Back in the Middle Ages, we had one of the major atonement theories or metaphors was the whole idea of victory, basically knocking the devil out, cold punch, Christ is victor. We don't hear that preached much anymore, but that made a lot of sense to folk in a certain place and time. Today, I would say atonement is a relational thing. And there's different ways you can talk about it, but the thing that seems to make sense in my conversations with people living in the green cultural space is to talk about atonement as relationship. That God loves us enough to come close to us, not to love us from a distance, but to come close to us, like really close, like in the person of Jesus Christ, and to get close enough to us to love us that we can feel that love, and even to get close enough to the danger zone of what we do in relationship with those who threaten us or who scare us or what have you. God could love us from a distance. God chose to love us up close, even close enough to get killed on a cross. That's how much God loves us. That's a relational way of talking about atonement. Or I once heard someone talk about a situation where you've got a sick child and they've got a knife in their hand, and you've got the syringe that will be the antidote to help them be saved. But in order for you to go and to get a shot, to give them the shot, they're gonna get you with the knife. Okay, that's the same kind of idea that Relationship with human beings is messy, and it's deadly. And God loved us enough to get close to the mess and to experience the deadliness and still empower to rise over that. Now, that's going to make a lot more sense to many young adults today than some of the ways we've learned to talk about atonement. But you understand it's the same gospel. It's the same stuff. If you recall, the blue space is the space of tradition. It is the space where Jesus comes in the world and rescues us from that red space. I was telling the kids last week, when you were being tempted, and some of you were more than tempted, to be a mean kid in middle school, you met Jesus. And he invited you to a different way of life and a different way of looking at your friends, and you realized, I cannot be a bully and follow Jesus. And you decided to follow him, and it was a life-transforming thing, and you moved into a blue space, okay? And then as you grew and you began to ask questions, you've kind of moved into that orange space, and you sometimes see things different than your parents, but you're grounded in Christ. Okay. In that blue space, the most important question about salvation is about core relationship to God, and it's about it's about eternal destiny, okay? All right? In the orange space, which is, again, most of those people living inside the Beltway of Atlanta, in that orange space, the primary starting point is not going to be talking about heaven and hell, but it's going to be talking about salvation on this earth. It's going to be talking about abundant life. You start there. You start about helping people in the madness in which they're living to discover that God has sanity for you. And you begin with abundant life. Working with the folks in the green space, who are mostly not with us in church, they are, it's going to be about the healing of the world. It's going to be about the God's calling and challenge to invite us to be a part of the solution. Not just for ourselves and our personal families, not specifically about our eternal destiny, but to begin with just the invitation to be co-creators and builders with God of a more just and beautiful planet. That's the place that most of them are going to engage to begin on the journey. And you'll get around to all the other stuff if you can begin that relationship and you can begin that journey with them. And look, in talking about gospel risk-taking, before I close, and I'm about at my end here, one of the things I love about the rising generation, most of whom are not in our churches, is they are more ready and willing to hear the hard words of Jesus than most of the people we've been preaching to for all these years. You don't have to sugarcoat it. They know that these are dire times in which we live, and dire times calls for serious action, and they are not surprised by that. And if you're going to get their attention at all, you're going to need to be bold in your challenge and invite them to take the full adventure with Jesus Christ, nothing watered down, okay? And that's going to be a lot more exciting for them and compelling for them than just to go to have a little bit of church. I was talking with someone here the other day. We had a church in South Alabama that met once every month, and we offered them a chance to meet once every week. And I remember what that old man said to the DS. He said, "Preacher, we don't want too much church." And there is, if you go every week, there is a sense in which among the tamed saints of our churches, there's a little bit of that culture, and the young people, they know it, and they want nothing to do with it. The churches that are reaching young people reach them because it is a full throttle, all out, let's go in full steam and give our lives to Jesus Christ and make a difference in this world. That'll get their attention. So in terms of gospel risk-taking, the nice thing is when you start working with the young ones, you don't have to water it down or tiptoe around. You can just, give them the full thing. I want to thank you for your attention. The book Weird Church goes into a lot more than what we just talked about, but I think it's a lot of fun. And I find it really, really helpful just to realize that you and myself. We're doing the best we can, but the context has changed, and we have to be responsive to that. And then to know, as I look around, beyond just the churches I work with, as I look around to see God is powerfully working in our time, and we can learn from some of those new forms and ways of doing church. Thank you very much.